The date is August 14th, 2005. The location is Larnaca International Airport, Cyprus. The time is 04 a.m. On the dark tarmac sits a Boeing 737-300, registered as 5BDBY. To the passengers who will board it in a few hours, it is just a machine, a vessel to take them to their holiday in Athens. But to the engineers working the night shift, this specific aircraft has become a problem child. Just hours earlier, on an inbound flight from London, the previous cabin crew reported a frightening anomaly. They heard a loud, rhythmic banging coming from the right aft service door. They reported that ice, thick white frost, was building up around the handle. At 30,000 feet, the door seal was failing. It was not a critical failure, but the sound of wind screaming through a cracked seal is enough to terrify anyone. The crew logged the defect in the aircraft's technical log. They demanded it be checked before the next flight, and so a ground engineer climbs aboard in the pre-dawn darkness to perform a pressurization leak check. To simulate the pressure of flight while the plane is sitting on the ground, the engineer has to close the outflow valves. He reaches up to the overhead panel, a complex board of switches and dials above the pilots' heads. He locates the pressurization mode selector. It is a silver toggle switch, no larger than a human finger. He flips it from auto to manual. He runs the test. The door passes. The leak is fixed. The seal holds. Satisfied, the engineer signs the logbook and leaves the aircraft. But he forgets one thing. He forgets to flip the silver switch back to auto. That single switch, left in the wrong position, is now a loaded gun pointed at the head of every person who will board Flight 522. The sun rises over the Mediterranean. The crew for Flight 522 arrives at the gate. Commanding the flight is Captain Hans-Jürgen Merten. He is 59 years old, a contract pilot from Germany. He is a veteran of the skies, having flown for Interflug and charter airlines for decades. He is known as a by-the-book pilot, strictly professional, perhaps a bit distant. His co-pilot is First Officer Pampos Charalambos, a 51-year-old Cypriot. He has flown for Helios for 5 years. They run through the pre-flight checklist. It is a ritual of aviation. Hydraulics? Checked. Fuel? Checked. Pressurization? In the routine of the moment, their eyes gloss over the panel. They expect the switch to be in auto because it is always in auto. They do not see the silver toggle pointing the wrong way. Behind the cockpit door, 115 passengers are boarding. Among them are families, couples, and 48 children. They are settling into their seats, buckling their belts, trusting that the two men in the front know the machine is safe. Working the cabin is a young flight attendant named Andreas Prodromou. Andreas is 25 years old. Today he is serving coffee, but his heart is in the cockpit. He holds a commercial pilot's license from the UK. He has spent his life savings learning to fly, but he cannot find a job as a pilot, so he works as a steward, waiting for his chance. He does not know that in 3 hours he will be the pilot in command of a dead ship. 0907. Flight 522 pushes back. The engines roar to life. The plane accelerates down the runway and lifts off into the clear blue sky. As the landing gear retracts, the physics of the atmosphere take over. At sea level, the air pressure is 14.7 pounds per square inch. It is thick, rich with oxygen. But as the plane climbs, that pressure drops rapidly. At 10,000 feet, the air is thin. At 30,000 feet, the air is unbreathable. The temperature is minus 40 degrees. Normally, the auto setting on the pressurization panel manages this danger automatically. It pumps air from the engines into the cabin to keep the environment safe. But the system is in manual. The rear outflow valves, the exhaust pipes for the air, are partially open. As the plane climbs, the air inside the cabin is not being trapped. It is leaking out into the atmosphere. The cabin is slowly depressurizing. 0912.
Altitude 12,000 feet. Suddenly, a loud, pulsing horn erupts in the cockpit. Beep, beep, beep. It is the cabin altitude warning horn. It is screaming at the pilots. The air is too thin. But this is where Boeing's design fails the human brain. On the 737-300, this specific horn sound is identical to the takeoff configuration warning, the alarm that tells you your flaps are wrong on the ground. Captain Merton is confused. Why is the takeoff config horn sounding? We are already in the air. He assumes it is a computer glitch. He assumes the machine is lying. He reaches up and cancels the alarm. He does not look at the pressurization gauge. If he did, he would see the needle climbing into the red zone. 0914. The plane passes 16,000 feet. The air inside the cabin is now thinner than the air at the top of Mount Fuji. This is the beginning of hypoxia, oxygen starvation of the brain. Hypoxia is dangerous because it is silent. It does not hurt. You do not gasp for air. The first symptom is a loss of color vision. The second symptom is confusion. The third symptom is euphoria. You feel happy. You feel warm. You feel like everything is going to be okay. The captain radios the Helios Operations Center. His voice is already slurring. Ops, this is 522. We have a takeoff config warning and my equipment cooling fans are off. The engineer on the ground is baffled. Cooling fans. The cooling fans have nothing to do with the takeoff horn. The captain is making irrational connections. The engineer asks the million-dollar question. Captain, can you confirm your pressurization panel is set to auto? Captain Merton ignores the question. His brain can no longer process complex sentences. He asks again, where are my equipment cooling circuit breakers? These are the last words ever heard from Flight 522. 0920. Altitude 29,000 feet. In the main cabin, the rubber jungle falls. The yellow oxygen masks drop from the ceiling. The automated voice plays, "Pull the mask towards you to start the flow of oxygen." The passengers are terrified. They strap the masks on. They look to the flight attendants for reassurance. But the flight attendants are dizzy. Walking down the aisle feels like walking through deep water. The oxygen generators in the passenger seats are chemical candles. They are designed to burn for exactly 12 minutes. This is enough time for a conscious pilot to perform an emergency dive to 10,000 feet, where the air is breathable. But the plane does not dive. It keeps climbing. The pilots are already gone. Captain Merton has collapsed behind his seat. First Officer Chair Lombus is slumped over the yoke. 0930. The oxygen in the masks runs out. The panic in the cabin fades into lethargy. The mothers stop holding their children tightly. Their hands relax. Their eyes close. One by one, 115 people drift into a deep, comatose sleep from which they will never wake up. The brain shuts down all non-essential functions to preserve the heart. The cabin is silent. The only sound is the roar of the engines. 10:20. Flight 522 enters Greek airspace. It levels off at 34,000 feet and enters a holding pattern over the island of Kea. For 70 minutes, the plane flies in a perfect circle. On the ground, the Greek government enters a state of high alert. It is 4 years after the 9/11 attacks. A commercial airliner is circling near Athens and refusing to answer the radio. The conclusion is logical: hijacking. The Prime Minister of Greece is contacted. He is faced with the ultimate decision: the Renegade Protocol. This is the secret NATO order that authorizes the military to shoot down a civilian airliner if it threatens a populated city. If Helios 522 turns toward the Parthenon or the Parliament building, the order will be given to fire missiles. Two F-16 fighter jets are scrambled from Nea Anchialos. Their mission is to intercept, identify, and if necessary, destroy Flight 522. 11:24. The F-16s arrive. They pull up alongside the Boeing 737 at Mach 0.8. The lead fighter pilot peers into the windows of the ghost plane. He expects to see terrorists with guns. Instead, he reports a scene that chills the blood of everyone listening in the command center. The blinds are down. I see liquid oxygen masks hanging. I see passengers seated, motionless. They are wearing masks, but they are not moving. He throttles forward to inspect the cockpit. The captain's seat is empty. I repeat, the captain's seat is empty. The first officer is in his seat, but he is slumped forward over the controls. He is not moving. The fighter pilot dips his wings, the international signal for "follow me." There is no response. The 737 just keeps flying its automated circle. 11:49. Movement in the cockpit. A figure enters the flight deck. It is not a pilot. It is a man wearing a flight attendant's vest. It is Andreas Prodromo. How is he alive? Investigators believe he found the portable oxygen bottles used by the crew. By hopping from bottle to bottle, he managed to stay awake while everyone else slept. He has spent 2 hours in a frozen hell, surrounded by the unconscious bodies of his colleagues and passengers. He enters the cockpit. He sits in the captain's seat. He puts on the headset. "Mayday, Mayday, Helios 522. He screams into the radio, but the frequency is still set to Cyprus. Athens cannot hear him. Andreas looks out the window. He sees the F-16. He raises a weak hand and waves. He grabs the yoke. He disengages the autopilot. The plane is now under human control for the first time in 3 hours. But Andreas is not trained on the 737, and he is running out of time. 11:50. Physics issues its final verdict. The left engine sputters. The fuel tanks are dry. The number 1 engine flames out. The plane lurches. Without the thrust of the left engine, the aircraft yaws violently. Andreas fights the controls, but the plane begins to descend from 34,000 feet to 20,000 to 10,000. 1200. The right engine flames out. The silence is total now. No engine roar, just the wind screaming over the fuselage. The electrical generators shut down. The cockpit goes dark. Andreas knows he cannot land the plane. He makes one final heroic decision. He banks the aircraft away from the suburbs of Athens. He aims for the uninhabited hills of Grammatiko. He chooses to die alone to save the people on the ground. 12:04. The F-16 pilots watch as the Boeing 737 clips the top of a ridge. It impacts the ground at 300 miles per hour. The tail shears off. The fuselage disintegrates. A massive fireball erupts up the side of the ravine. When the investigators reached the crash site, they found the cockpit overhead panel in the smoldering debris. The pressurization mode selector was found in the manual position. The crash of Helios 522 changed aviation history. Boeing was forced to redesign the warning system. Now, the cabin altitude horn sounds different from the takeoff horn. A warning light was added to the panel. But these changes came too late for the 121 souls who flew into the silence on August 14, 2005. This has been the complete timeline of the ghost flight. End of log. The date is August 12, 1985. The location is Haneda Airport, Tokyo. It is the height of the Obon holiday season, a time when families in Japan return to their ancestral homes to honor the spirits of the dead. The airport is crowded with travelers. Heat waves rise from the tarmac. Sitting at Gate 18 is a massive machine, a Boeing 747 SR. This is the short-range version of the famous jumbo jet, designed specifically to carry huge numbers of passengers on short hops between Japanese cities.
It is a flying stadium, capable of lifting 500 people into the sky. On this humid evening, Flight 123 is fully booked. 509 passengers board the aircraft. There are 12 crew members. In total, 524 souls are sealing themselves inside the pressure hull. Commanding the flight is Captain Masami Takahama. He is 49 years old, a veteran instructor pilot with over 12,000 flight hours. He is considered one of the best hands at Japan Airlines. Beside him is First Officer Yutaka Sasaki, who is training to be a captain. Because this is a training flight, Captain Takahama sits in the right seat to supervise, while Sasaki flies the plane from the left. Behind them sits flight engineer Hiroshi Fukuda, managing the complex hydraulic and fuel systems. They do not know that their fate was sealed 7 years ago by a mistake made in a repair hangar thousands of miles away. In 1978, this same aircraft had scraped its tail on a runway in Osaka. The impact cracked the rear pressure bulkhead, the umbrella-shaped steel dome that seals the back of the plane. It is the most critical shield in the aircraft, holding back the immense pressure of the cabin air. Boeing engineers repaired it, but they made a fatal error. They used 2 separate rows of rivets instead of one continuous plate. It reduced the strength of the part by 30%. For 7 years, over 12,000 flights, the metal has been flexing, breathing in, breathing out, developing microscopic cracks that no one can see. On August 12, 1985, the metal is ready to let go. 6:12 p.m. Flight 123 pushes back from the gate. The 4 massive Pratt & Whitney engines spool up. The plane taxis to the runway and lifts off toward Osaka. The climb is smooth. The seatbelt signs are turned off. The flight attendants begin serving drinks. The sun is setting over Sagami Bay, casting long shadows over the water. 6:24 p.m. The aircraft reaches 24,000 feet. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocks the fuselage. The sound is not a bomb. It is the rear pressure bulkhead exploding. The pressurized air inside the cabin rushes out with the force of a hurricane, blowing the vertical stabilizer, the giant tail fin, clean off the airplane. In the cockpit, the air turns to white fog as the pressure drops. The cabin altitude horn begins to scream. "Something exploded," the captain says. His voice is calm but confused. He looks at his instruments. He expects to see a problem with a door. He does not know that the tail of his airplane is gone. He does not know that the explosion has severed all 4 hydraulic lines. A Boeing 747 is controlled by fluid. Liquid pressure moves the rudder, the elevators, and the ailerons. Without hydraulic fluid, the control yoke is useless. It is disconnected. Flight engineer Fukuda looks at his panel. "Hydraulic pressure dropping," he reports. Then, a moment later, the chilling realization. All loss. Every gauge reads 0. The fluid has drained into the ocean. The plane is now a 400-ton projectile moving at 500 miles per hour, and the pilots have no steering wheel. Thus begins the phugoid cycle. Without the tail to stabilize it, the nose of the plane begins to rise. It climbs sharply, trading speed for altitude. It goes up and up until it nearly stalls. Then the nose drops violently. The plane dives toward the ocean, gaining speed until the lift catches it, and it shoots back up again. It is a roller coaster. Up, down, up, down. In the cabin, passengers are screaming. They are being crushed into their seats by G-forces, then lifted weightless as the plane dives. Oxygen masks are swaying. Children are crying. Captain Takahama realizes the yoke doesn't work. He tries a desperate technique. He uses the engines to steer. If he wants to turn left, he blasts the right engines. If he wants to lift the nose, he blasts all 4. "Power! Power!" he yells. For 32 minutes, these 3 men wrestled the crippled giant. They are fighting physics. They manage to turn the plane back toward the land, away from the dark ocean. In the cabin, the passengers realize they are not going to land. They take out pens and paper. In the flickering light, amidst the heaving of the plane, they begin to write farewell notes to their families. Hirotsugu Kawaguchi, a 52-year-old father, writes to his children, "Be good to each other and work hard. Help your mother. I am very sad, but I'm sure I won't make it. I don't know the cause. It has been 5 minutes now. The plane is turning around and around. To think that our dinner last night was the last time."
6:56 p.m. The struggle ends. The plane enters a rapid dive over the mountains of Gunma Prefecture. The pilots fight until the very last second. "Pull up, pull up!" The ground proximity warning system screams. The right wing clips a ridge called the U-turn. The aircraft flips over. Flight 123 slams into the forest of Mount Osutaka at 340 knots. The impact registers on seismographs in Tokyo. Then, silence. The sun has set. It is now night. The mountain is shrouded in cold rain. But the horror is not over. The impact was massive, but the rear section of the plane, where the passengers were sitting, broke off and slid down the slope into a ravine. It did not burn. There are survivors. Yumi Ochiai, an off-duty flight attendant, wakes up in the wreckage. She is pinned under seats. It is pitch black. The rain is falling on the metal. She hears sounds. She hears a helicopter overhead. It is a U.S. Air Force rescue helicopter from a nearby base. They have spotted the fire. They are ready to drop Marines down to help. But politics intervenes. The Japanese government orders the Americans to stand down. They want their own self-defense forces to handle the rescue. But the Japanese rescue team believes no one could have survived the impact. They decide to wait until morning to climb the mountain. They set up camp in the village below. On the mountain, Yumi Ochiai listens. She hears a boy crying in the darkness. She hears a young woman calling for her mother. "Okasan, Okasan." She tries to call out to them, but her voice is weak. Slowly, as the night wears on, the voices grow quieter. The boy stops crying. The woman stops calling. The rain turns into a cold mist. Hypoxia and internal bleeding take the survivors one by one. 14 hours later, the sun rises on August 13th. The rescue team finally reaches the crash site. They find a scene of total devastation, but miraculously, they find movement. They pull Yumi Ochiai from the wreckage. They find a 12-year-old girl, Keiko Kawakami, found sitting in a tree where she had been thrown. They find a mother and her 8-year-old daughter. 4 survivors. Only 4. Doctors would later testify that many others had survived the initial impact. Their bodies were still warm when they were found. If the rescue teams had arrived in the night, dozens more might have been saved. They died waiting in the rain. The crash of JAL 123 remains a scar on the history of aviation. It changed how planes are repaired. It changed how hydraulic systems are designed. But for the families of the 520 people who were lost, it remains a memory of a hot summer evening, a long struggle in the sky, and a silent night on the mountain. The farewell notes found in the pockets of the victims are now displayed in a museum near the crash site. They serve as a final testament to the human spirit in the face of inevitable tragedy. The black box recording of Captain Takahama fighting to the end is used in flight schools around the world. It teaches young pilots that as long as the plane is flying, you never give up. This has been the archive of JAL.